The room was already tense, every seat filled with the low hum of political sparring. When Barron Trump leaned back in his chair, smirk curling at the edge of his lips. Then, like a dagger hurled without warning, he let it fly. "Do you even know who your real mom is?" The words didn't just hang in the air, they sliced through it. Gasps erupted instantly, sharp and involuntary, as though the entire chamber had been punched in the stomach at once. A few muffled laughs cracked out from his corner, quickly drowned by a wave of stunned silence. Every camera, every eye, every breath locked on the woman sitting opposite him. Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. For the briefest second, her body froze, not from fear, but from calculation. Her lips pressed together in stillness, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly, as though measuring the weight of his insult before deciding whether it even deserved an answer. The silence stretched long enough to make people shift in their seats, to make viewers at home grip their remotes tighter, and then came the smirk. Subtle, quiet, devastating. A smirk that said, "I've heard worse." A smirk that promised, "You're about to regret that." The murmurs began to ripple. First a whisper in the back row, then two, then a swelling current of disbelief washing over the chamber. The kind of murmurs that signal not just shock, but anticipation, as if the audience already sensed the electricity. Of a moment that history would remember, Barron leaned forward slightly, expecting fluster, expecting stammer, expecting the unraveling of dignity he had tried to provoke. But Jasmine's stillness was its own storm. It was the pause before the thunder. Somewhere in the gallery, a spectator covered their mouth. A staffer lowered their gaze, unsure whether to laugh or recoil. The camera zoomed in, hungry, capturing the poised face of a woman who had just been thrown the ugliest of insults and looked ready to turn it into her greatest weapon. The chamber held its breath, and with it, the nation. Because what Jasmine Crockett said next would not just silence Barron Trump. It would echo far beyond those walls. Asterisk, this wasn't just a careless insult tossed into the air like so many others that fly in the heat of politics. This was the Senate chamber, the heart of American democracy, where words are etched into the public record and every syllable echoes through microphones, cameras, and headlines. What Barron Trump had said didn't remain in that room. It raced outward like a spark on dry grass, reaching every corner of a nation already smoldering with division. Because in America, questions of family, of roots, of belonging have never been just words. They cut deeper. They carry histories of immigrants who crossed oceans only to be told they didn't belong. They carry the wounds of children who grew up with whispers about their identities, their accents, the color of their skin. They carry centuries of voices that had been told, "You are less than." And so, when Barron smirked his way through that jab, he wasn't just taunting Jasmine Crockett, he was tugging at one of the oldest and most painful threads in the American fabric. Jasmine knew it. Everyone in that chamber knew it. And millions watching at home felt it. In that instant, she wasn't just Jasmine Crockett, Congresswoman. She became the stand-in for every person who had ever had their family questioned. Their background mocked, their story reduced to a punchline. That's why the silence had been so deafening. It wasn't the hush after a clever joke. It was the silence that comes when people recognize they've just witnessed a line being crossed, a wound being reopened. Some tried to mask it with nervous chuckles, but most simply stared, wide-eyed, as if asking themselves, did he really just say that? Barron, in his youth and arrogance, believed it was banter, the kind of sharp elbow his family had always thrown with impunity. To him, it was a dig, a stunt to rattle a political opponent. But to the rest of the room, it was something else entirely. It was evidence of the entitlement that believes cruelty is wit, that believes privilege shields you from consequence. And here was the deeper irony, Barron, who had been raised in the most scrutinized family in America, chose family as the weapon to wound someone else. It revealed not strength but weakness, a boy's instinct to lash out, not a leader's ability to argue. Meanwhile, Jasmine's silence grew louder with every second. Her calmness became a kind of resistance, a refusal to grant his words the chaos they demanded. The longer she waited, the more the room shifted. What had begun as Barron's stage suddenly felt like hers. People leaned forward, sensing something coming. Something bigger. Something inevitable. This wasn't just going to be a rebuttal. It was going to be a reckoning, and Barron Trump, in that moment, had no idea. He thought he had thrown a joke, a casual taunt meant to score a reaction, but what he had really done was light a fuse under his own feet. Because what Jasmine Crockett was about to unleash would not only put him in his place, it would ripple far beyond the chamber, striking at the heart of what America chooses to value: cruelty or dignity, mockery or respect. Barron thought it was just a joke. He had no idea what storm he had unleashed. Asterisk. Barron Trump entered the public eye wrapped in the velvet of untouchable privilege. From the moment he was born, the cameras knew his name. Not because of his own deeds, not because of struggle or sacrifice, but because of the golden surname etched into America's consciousness: Trump. For most children, missteps are private, hidden away in family albums. For Barron, every shrug, every smirk, every mispronounced word was consumed by a watching world. Yet unlike most who grow under the weight of scrutiny, he was taught not humility, but entitlement. He grew up in towers of glass and steel, castles where silence was bought and criticism was banished. Every question had a press secretary's answer, every scandal a lawyer's defense. What ordinary Americans experience as consequence the sting of accountability, the pain of mistakes, was replaced in Barron's world with a shrug and a check. And so, he learned early the lesson that words are currency only for others. For him, they were toys to be tossed, sharpened, discarded without a thought. The result was a young man convinced of invulnerability. Arrogance became his armor, sarcasm his sword. To his admirers, he appeared clever, unbothered, untouchable. But beneath that polished arrogance lay a hollowness he could never quite cover: the absence of resilience. Because what he inherited wasn't strength, it was insulation. He strutted into the Senate chamber, carrying that same posture. The confidence of someone who believed his family name made him bulletproof. When he lobbed the insult at Jasmine Crockett, he expected it to land like a schoolyard jab, a momentary sting, nothing more. After all, insults had always been the family's currency. His father had built rallies on taunts. His uncles and cousins traded in mockery. For Barron, cruelty wasn't crossing a line, it was tradition. But tradition and entitlement do not make toughness. True toughness is forged in failure, in standing back up when the world knocks you down. Barron had never known that fight. He had only known a world where setbacks were swept aside by money, by power, by the careful stage managing of image. So he mistook insulation for resilience. He mistook privilege for grit. This contradiction was never more obvious than in moments like this, when the stage lights burned bright and the cameras refused to blink. He believed he could play the role of provocateur, tossing verbal grenades with a smirk. But the second real scrutiny came, the second the audience didn't laugh with him, the veneer began to crack. That crack was beginning now. Even as he sat back in his chair, smug in the echo of his own insult, the shift was happening. The gasps weren't admiration. They were recoil. The murmurs weren't agreement. They were disbelief. But Barron couldn't hear it. He couldn't recognize the sound of a crowd turning. Privilege had deafened him. It was dramatic irony in its purest form. Here was a young man who claimed strength, who claimed the mantle of his family's iron will. And yet he was blind to the fact that his words had just planted the seeds of his undoing. Because the truth about arrogance is that it blinds before it shatters. It convinces you the world is laughing with you when, in fact, the world is laughing at you. It tells you you've won the room, even as the room quietly waits for your downfall. And Barron Trump, raised in marble halls and golden penthouses, had never learned to see the difference. He thought he was in control. He thought his smirk was still winning. But those who watched closely could already see it: the tightening jaw, restless hands, the flicker of doubt behind his eyes. The boy who believed himself untouchable was, in reality, standing on glass, and yet this same arrogance would soon backfire in the most humiliating way. Long before she ever sat in that chamber across from Barron Trump, Jasmine Crockett was learning what it meant to fight for dignity. She was not born into glass towers or golden elevators. Her beginnings were modest, stitched together by family values and the quiet strength of a community that understood struggle. Her parents taught her that respect is not inherited, it is earned, and that service to others is the truest path to meaning. As a girl, Jasmine didn't grow up insulated from hardship. She saw neighbors juggling too, sometimes 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. She watched classmates disappear into cycles of poverty, their potential smothered by systems that pretended not to see them. She absorbed it all, not as a reason to despair, but as a reason to stand taller. Where others saw walls, Jasmine saw challenges to climb. That was the seed of her calling. Community service wasn't an extracurricular activity for her. It was survival, and it was solidarity. She organized food drives in high school, not for recognition, but because she had friends who went hungry. She volunteered at shelters, not because it looked good on a resume, but because she could not accept walking past people society had discarded. These experiences didn't just sharpen her empathy, they hardened her resolve. When she pursued law, it wasn't the promise of prestige that pulled her. It was the faces of the overlooked, the voices of those drowned out by wealth and power. She chose the cases others passed over. Tenants battling slumlords, workers cheated out of wages, families trapped in cycles of eviction. She knew what it meant to stand beside the powerless against the powerful, to walk into courtrooms where the odds were stacked and still find a way to tilt them toward justice. It was never glamorous. The hours were long, the paychecks thin, the sacrifices heavy, but sacrifice was a language Jasmine spoke fluently. She gave up comfort for purpose. She traded leisure for labor, knowing every late night she worked might mean one less family losing their home, one more child finding safety. And as her reputation grew, so too did her responsibility. She became not just a lawyer, not just a representative, but a symbol of resilience for people who rarely saw themselves represented at all. Her rise into politics was not inevitable. It was earned inch by inch. Every campaign event was a conversation on porches, in community centers, in crowded church basements. She didn't have billionaires writing checks on her behalf. She had volunteers with homemade signs, donors scraping together $10, teenagers passing out flyers in the heat. She built her career on the backs of those who believed in her, not because she was untouchable, but because she was reachable. That authenticity became her armor. It was why, when she walked into powerful rooms, she did not shrink. She carried with her the weight of the communities that had carried her. And that made her different from someone like Barron Trump. He had been taught that power was inherited. She had learned that power must be fought for and fought with. It's why insults like his, however sharp, could not cut her. She had already been through worse storms. She had faced dismissals from judges who doubted her, smirks from opposing counsel who underestimated her, and headlines that twisted her words. Each time, she had responded the same way, not with anger, but with poise. Not with cruelty, but with clarity and truth. Barron's jab was nothing compared to the struggles she had already endured. How could a spoiled insult from a privileged young man compare to the pain of sitting with a family about to lose their home? How could his words wound deeper than the quiet sorrow of telling a client the system had failed them again? Compared to that, Barron was just noise. Noise she was uniquely prepared to silence. And that was the difference. 2 Barron words were toys. To Jasmine, words were lifelines. She understood the power of a single sentence, to lift, to heal, to defend. She had wielded that power countless times before, in front of judges, juries, and communities who depended on her to speak what they could not. And now, as she sat across from him, she was ready to wield it again, in her stillness. In that smirk that curled across her lips after his insult, lay the entire story of her journey. A woman forged by struggle, guided by values, armed with dignity. She was not rattled because she had been here before, though in different forms. She had stood before giants who seemed untouchable and watched them crumble when faced with truth. And so, as the chamber buzzed with shock and anticipation, Jasmine's composure wasn't an act. It was instinct. She wasn't frozen because she didn't know what to say. She was waiting because she knew exactly how to say it. She'd faced tougher than Barron. She'd faced more dangerous insults, sharper attacks, more consequential battles. and she knew exactly how to answer him. Asterisk if Barron Trump expected his first insult to break Jasmine. Her silence only unsettled him further. What he read as hesitation was in fact strategy, but arrogance made him blind. So instead of retreating, he pressed harder. He leaned forward, voice dripping with sarcasm, tossing his next barb like a teenager eager for attention. "What's the matter, Congresswoman? Cat got your tongue? Or are you too busy trying to figure out which mom we're talking about?" A few scattered chuckles bubbled up from his corner, but they rang hollow, forced. The kind of laughter that dies quickly when the room refuses to join. Jasmine remained still. Not a twitch, not a word. Her eyes fixed on him with an expression that was neither anger nor amusement, but something more dangerous. Patience. The kind of patience that makes opponents stumble into their own traps. Barron didn't notice. He mistook her silence for weakness. He doubled down again. "See, this is the problem. People like you want to play victim all day long. But when it's time to answer a real question, nothing. Just silence." The murmurs began to grow louder now, no longer simple gasps of disbelief, but ripples of restlessness. Journalists in the press box exchanged glances, sensing the contours of a story too sharp to ignore. A senator shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable, while another leaned back with a knowing smirk, as if waiting for the hammer to drop. Still, Jasmine said nothing. She let him dig deeper, every word he spoke sounding less like wit and more like desperation. The crowd could hear it, the rhythm of a boy trying too hard, straining to keep control of a moment that was slipping away with each syllable. It was subtle, but the balance in the room was changing. What had begun as his attempt at dominance now looked like unraveling. The laughter was gone. The smirks were fading. The chamber, restless and unsettled, was beginning to shift its energy toward her. People leaned forward in their seats, waiting, and Jasmine, she knew exactly what she was doing. She had used this weapon before: silence, the kind that makes every insult sound louder, every cheap shot echo emptier. Silence that forces the attacker to reveal his own weakness. It was a strategy honed in courtrooms, refined in community halls, perfected in moments when stakes were higher than insults. Barron mistook it for passivity. But the others, they began to see it for what it was: a coiled spring waiting by the time he added his final shaky jab. "Guess maybe you don't even know the answer yourself." The words didn't land with force. They fell flat, met with sighs, with rolled eyes, with the unmistakable sense that the crowd was turning against him. His arrogance had carried him too far. Jasmine's silence had left him exposed. The room was restless now, but restless in anticipation, not in discomfort. Phones were already out, recording, knowing something was about to happen. Reporters' pens hovered above their pads, ready to capture the spark that was inevitable. Even Barron, for all his bravado, began to sense it. The faint tremor of doubt creeping in at the edges of his voice. The faint heat flushing his cheeks. The duel had been one-sided so far, but only because Jasmine had chosen it to be. She had let him swing wildly, watching each punch miss, waiting for the perfect moment. And now, the chamber felt like it was holding a collective breath, bracing for the release. And then, with a single breath, Jasmine began her counterattack. The chamber was restless, the air thick with tension, the crowd leaning forward, phones poised, waiting. Barron Trump had thrown insult after insult, sarcasm piled on sarcasm, mistaking silence for weakness. But Jasmine Crockett had been waiting for this moment, measuring her breath, sharpening her reply like a blade she would wield with precision. And then, it happened. She leaned forward slightly, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on him. A pause, deliberate, surgical. That silence, heavier than all of Barron's words combined, dropped over the room like a curtain. A smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth. Not smug, not cruel, but controlled. The kind of smirk that says, "I've got you exactly where I want you." When she spoke, her voice was steady. No rush, no quiver. Every word carved into the silence with razor clarity. "At least I know my mother raised me with values. Can you say the same?" The room froze, gasps, audible, collective, a heartbeat of silence that stretched far longer than it should have. Barron blinked, his face flushing deep red. Caught in the shock of hearing his own weapon turn back on him with lethal force, and then it happened. The eruption, applause burst out. Not polite or hesitant, but thunderous. People leaped to their feet. Laughter rippled through the crowd, sharp and unstoppable. The energy ricocheted across the chamber, a tidal wave that drowned out whatever weak comeback Barron might have been fumbling for. The validation didn't stop inside the room. In real time, TikTok edits would slice and remix that exact moment. Dramatic zoom on Jasmine's smirk. Slow motion replay of Barron's stunned expression. Captions flashing across screens. "She ate him alive," or "This is how you end a trust fund, brat," on Twitter. The takes began pouring in instantly. "She cooked him alive on national TV. That's not a clapback. That's a funeral service, ladies and gentlemen." Barron Trump has left the chat. Even reaction cams caught the ripple effect. A senator in the back leaned forward, trying to stifle a grin. A staffer's jaw dropped wide open. Someone in the audience mouthed, "Oh my God," to their friend, who nodded in stunned agreement. And at the center of it all, Barron, his composure cracked like glass under pressure. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. His eyes darted, searching for a lifeline, but every face he met was against him now. Amused, entertained, vindicated. The arrogance that had carried him this far dissolved in an instant. He tried again, stuttering, fumbling for something, anything. But the chamber had already chosen its victor. Every second he hesitated was another nail in the coffin. For the first time, silence was his only answer. Jasmine didn't need to say more. She leaned back in her chair, calm, collected, unbothered, as if the exchange had cost her nothing at all. The kind of restraint that made her words echo louder than any tirade could have. The scene became legend within minutes. Hashtags trended globally. Hashtag values over privilege, hashtag Crockett V's. Barron hashtag mic drop moment clips. Circulated across Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts. Each replaying the line with cinematic music overlays, slow motion zooms, text in bold red font. "At least I know my mother raised me with values." The internet crowned it as the definitive political clapback of the year. But beyond the spectacle, something deeper resonated. For many watching, it wasn't just about a debate takedown. It was about dignity, pushing back against entitlement. About resilience, silencing arrogance. Jasmine had become a symbol of composure under fire, her poise contrasting so starkly with Barron's unraveling. And Barron? His legacy of untouchable privilege now had a crack, one that the world had witnessed live. In high definition, replayed endlessly with captions and commentary. The heir to power had been humbled, not by shouting or chaos, by one sentence spoken with conviction. It wasn't just a counterattack. It was a lesson. A reminder that arrogance, no matter how tall, can crumble under the weight of truth delivered with grace. And as the applause still thundered around her, Jasmine's smirk lingered. She had faced tougher than Barron, and tonight, she reminded the world why silence, timing, and truth can dismantle even the loudest opponent. Asterisk, the chamber was still buzzing long after. Jasmine's words had settled like thunder in the rafters. But outside those walls, the real storm had only just begun. The clips spread at lightning speed, first through journalists' live tweets, then into group chats, Discord servers, and the endless scroll of TikTok. By the time evening news anchors were cutting to the exchange, it was already everywhere. The line that detonated across America was unmistakable. "At least I know my mother raised me with values. Can you say the same?" Within minutes, hashtags erupted like fireworks. Hashtag WHOS your mom, hashtag Crockett vs Barron, hashtag values over privilege. Each tag carried its own wave of creativity. Some used them to share solidarity, others to roast Barron, and many simply to revel in the pure drama of the takedown. TikTok edits layered Jasmine's words over slow-motion zooms, cinematic bass drops, and flashing captions, "Game over." Others stitched her smirk with audience reaction gifs. From Oprah gasping to Michael Jordan laughing, the internet had spoken, and it crowned Jasmine victorious. On Twitter, the verdict was even harsher. One viral post read, "She cooked him alive on national TV." Barron asked for smoke, got wildfire. Another racked up 500,000 likes. Reminder, silence is a weapon. Jasmine Crockett just taught a masterclass. Someone else clipped Barron's stammer, looping it with captions. Error 404, comeback not found. Memes came fast and merciless. Barron's frozen face was photoshopped into everything. A deer caught in headlights. A Wi-Fi router buffering. Even the infamous "This is fine" cartoon dog surrounded by flames. TikTok teens auto-tuned his stutter into a remix titled "Ooh-Ah Remix," which topped trending sounds within 24 hours. Instagram Reels cut his insult into Jasmine's reply, complete with UFC fight bells. Round 1 goes to Crockett. Late-night comedy amplified the spectacle. Studio audiences laughed so hard they drowned out the hosts. One joked Barron asked about moms. Jasmine reminded him America's not impressed with trust funds. "We're impressed with backbone," another quipped. First time Barron's been left speechless. Let's hope it's not the last. The crowd roared, the clip replayed, the verdict unanimous. He had been humbled. But beyond the comedy, something deeper resonated. Celebrities and activists jumped in not just for the humor, but for the meaning. An Oscar-winning actress tweeted, "That was more than a clapback. That was every woman who's ever been underestimated." Standing tall, a Grammy-winning rapper shared Jasmine's line with the caption, "Say it louder for the kids born with silver spoons and empty souls." Civil rights leaders weighed in, praising her composure as an act of dignity under fire, and the people felt it. Ordinary Americans posted personal stories, attaching them to the hashtags. Children of immigrants tweeted about being mocked for their accents. Black women wrote about the resilience it took to be heard in rooms full of dismissive men. Parents talked about raising their kids with values when money was scarce. Jasmine's moment became theirs. Her clapback wasn't just her victory, it was validation for millions who had been on the receiving end of arrogance dressed as power. Meanwhile, Barron's humiliation metastasized into something bigger than a bad headline. He became a walking cautionary tale. His insult was replayed not as sharp wit, but as petty cruelty. His silence afterward became symbolic of inherited privilege crumbling under the weight of authenticity. Memes immortalized him, and not kindly. He wasn't just roasted. He was rewritten into internet folklore. Destined to be remembered less as a political heir and more as the punchline. To Jasmine Crockett's legendary mic drop. But here's what few expected. Jasmine wasn't basking. She wasn't scrolling through memes laughing at her opponent's fall. She was thinking ahead. Because Jasmine Crockett understood something Barron never had. That moments like this, rare as they are, can be fleeting unless you give them roots. And so, while the internet danced and the late-night hosts joked, Jasmine's mind was already turning. She didn't just want a viral clip. She wanted change. She wanted the energy of that clapback to outlive the news cycle. The world thought the battle was over, but Jasmine knew better. She was about to turn a clapback into a cause. Asterisk when the laughter faded. When the hashtags began to scroll a little slower, Jasmine Crockett did something unexpected. She didn't just ride the wave of virality. She stood up in front of microphones, in town halls and on morning news shows, and reframed the moment. To her, it was never about a single insult or even about her. It was about what that insult revealed and what her response could mean for everyone. Watching, she began by stripping the cruelty down to its core. "This isn't about me," she said, her voice steady but warm. "This is about the idea that some people think your worth can be mocked, that your family can be diminished, that your roots can be a punchline. And I'm here to tell you, no one has the right to take that from you." It wasn't just words. It was a lesson delivered with the authority of someone who had lived it, who had faced dismissals, coded insults, and smirks from the powerful before. Jasmine turned Barron's insult into a mirror for America, asking the country to look at itself. "Family isn't defined by insults," she declared. "Family is defined by love, by values, and by service to something bigger than yourself. That's what my mother taught me. That's what so many of your families taught you. That's what this country deserves to remember." Crowds leaned in when she spoke, because it didn't feel like politics anymore. It felt like truth. In a landscape too often saturated with sound bites and scandals, Jasmine's words carried a rare weight. She wasn't tearing anyone down. She was lifting everyone up, and it resonated. Immigrant families saw themselves in her message, the idea that dignity comes not from pedigree, but from sacrifice. Black mothers nodded at their screens, recognizing their own teachings echoed in her voice. Young people, scrolling through endless edits of her viral moment, suddenly saw more than a clapback. They saw a blueprint for how to handle cruelty without losing composure. Without losing soul, even skeptics had to admit it. Jasmine embodied a different kind of strength. Not the loud, chest-thumping bravado that often dominates political theater, but a strength born of restraint, of grace, of choosing dignity when insulted. In her hands, silence had been a weapon, and words had been a scalpel. She reminded America of something it too often forgets, that cruelty burns hot but brief, while truth endures. That arrogance can dominate a headline, but values build a legacy. And that no matter how loudly privilege shouts, humility and service will always echo louder in the long run. Her message wasn't just for those who cheered her. It was for anyone who had ever been on the receiving end of mockery. Anyone who had ever felt belittled for who they are or where they come from. If you've ever been told you don't belong, she said in one speech, remember, you define belonging. If you've ever been told you're less than, remember, your values make you more. And if you've ever been mocked for your family, remember, family is not about perfection. It's about love. The insult that was meant to diminish her had, in her hands, expanded into a universal declaration. It wasn't Jasmine versus Barron anymore. It was dignity versus disrespect, values versus vanity, service versus self-interest. And that's why people listened. Not because she humiliated her opponent, though she had, but because she gave them something bigger to hold on to. She turned the fleeting satisfaction of a clapback into the enduring power of a creed. In living rooms and classrooms, parents replayed her speech for their children. Teachers quoted her lines in civics lessons. Faith leaders wove her message into sermons. The viral clip had started as entertainment, but Jasmine transformed it into a national meditation on what it means to carry yourself with pride. No matter the insult, for her supporters, it was hope. For her critics, it was a challenge. For the country, it was a reminder. The measure of strength isn't how loud you insult, but how firmly you stand in your truth. And so the story of that moment shifted again. It wasn't just a clapback. It was a compass. Because in the end, Jasmine Crockett had shown that truth, once spoken, always outlasts cruelty. Asterisk, your real mom is? Those were the words meant to slice, meant to humiliate, meant to reduce Jasmine Crockett to a punchline. But instead, they became the spark for something unforgettable. What was designed as cruelty transformed into dignity. What was meant to silence became a declaration. And in that moment, the insult no longer belonged to Barron Trump. It belonged to Jasmine Crockett, who turned it into a lesson for the nation. Because the truth is simple. Dignity will always outlast hate. Truth will always shine brighter than arrogance. And grace under fire will always echo louder than the hollow sting of insult. Jasmine didn't just shut down a cruel remark. She reminded every one of us that our worth is not measured by mockery, but by the values we live, the families we honor, and the service we give. So, as we leave this story, ask yourself, what do you take from it? Do you hear just the sound of an insult? Or do you hear the music of a response that carried more power than any microphone could hold? Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a debate. She modeled a kind of courage America is hungry for. Courage that refuses to meet hate with hate, arrogance with arrogance, but instead transforms venom into vision. And if you believe that courage must always speak louder than cruelty, then share this story. Pass it along, not because it's viral, not because it's entertaining, but because it's a reminder that dignity belongs to all of us. It cannot be taken away by the careless words of the privileged. If you want to see more stories where truth wins and arrogance falls, where voices of dignity rise above the noise, then subscribe. Be part of a community that refuses to let mockery define our politics, and instead chooses hope, pride, and resilience. And so we end where it all began. Inside that chamber, with Barron Trump leaning forward, smug and certain that his words would land. They didn't. He was left speechless, caught in the silence of his own arrogance. But Jasmine Crockett? She rose, walked out of that chamber with her head high, her smirk unshaken, her words already rippling through the world beyond those walls. Because sometimes, the greatest victories aren't in the insults we throw, they're in the truths that endure.